Good morning, everyone. Let's start with this topic India and the Global South, India's relations with Africa and Latin America, and Indian leadership role in the demand for NIEO and WTO negotiations. And these topics belong to UPSC PSIR. So, before proceeding on to the introduction, let's have a look at India's present geopolitical stature and the historical context that brought India to the situation it is in today. So historical context के बारे में तो most of the UPSC aspirants they are well aware of that India was reeling under 200 years of exploitative colonial rule, and so severe was the exploitation. I give you an example. In last 60 to 70 years of colonial rule, there was around 120 famines, and those famines killed around 20 million people. And above all, when the British left in 1947, they left nothing to speak of. They left an India that was severely exploited and highly pauperized. But उसके बाद भी India in these 7 to 8 decades, India has risen like a phoenix. India has proved the unimaginable, or in present time, our geopolitical stature, it is of a middle and emerging power. फिर साथ में एक लास्ट जो चीज़ है पॉपुलेशन को देखते हैं. Population, I am going to highlight this topic because our GDP is counted among the top 5 GDPs of the world. But still, when you look at the ratio between the population and GDP, or the GDP distribution among the population, it is very less. It's like, for example, if there are two countries, A and B, A has a GDP of 100 and B has a GDP of 500. Now, you can see B has higher GDP than A. But the population of A is 10 people, whereas the population of B, it is 100 people. Now you can see the GDP to population ratio. The distribution in A, it will be around $10 for each individual, whereas in the case of B, it will be $5 for each individual. तो ये जो डिफरेंस है यही प्रॉब्लम इंडिया के कंटेक्स्ट में भी है that we may have higher GDP but population भी इतनी है कि उस population का distribution है it comes up with nothing in hand. Now let's proceed with the introduction. So India's engagement in the world has always been shaped by unique historical experience of colonialism, its deep civilizational ethos, and its aspiration for an equitable international order. So UPSC के लिए ये तीन चीज़ें जो हैं ये ध्यान रखिए. First, the unique experience of colonialism. वो क्या experience था? The experience of exploitation, that of learning, that of increasing the stature, that of modernity. So the whole experience of colonialism was contradictory in many of its elements. एक तरफ British they exploited us, और दूसरी तरफ they provided us with the modern tools. Then when you talk about deep civilizational ethos, it means that India as a civilization has been in existence for more than 3000 years. और इस लंबे टाइम में if certain population is existing, so in evolutionary term that population is hardy and resilient. क्योंकि एक किसी भी geographical area, किसी भी environment में अगर कोई population exists for 3000 years, then it has learned a lot of lessons. It learned important lessons, and those lessons have been transmitted to generation in a way that with each successive generation, some flexibility allows such lessons to be incorporated in life, and further, these lessons create a new normal for survival. So all in all, 3000 years, it means something. It means that yes, Indian civilization has some some flexibility, some virtue, some agility, some resilience that has allowed it to survive for that long. Then finally comes the aspiration for an equitable international order. So, PSIR के students जो हैं, they are very well aware about this realist theory that the international landscape, it is one of anarchical, one of anarchy, where there are no rules, no global rules, no global authority. Every country is existing in self-help system, which means nobody is there to rescue them, nobody is coming for them, they are on their own. So in that system, in that anarchical international order, India aspires for an equitable scenario where all the rules mostly that concern trade, politics, interactions, and security, all these rules and all these paradigm, they are distributed equally. ऐसा नहीं होना चाहिए कि most of the scenario, most of these paradigm, they favor the rich. और वैसा जो नॉर्मल ग्राउंड वर्क है, ग्राउंड रियलिटीज़ हैं, वो यही है कि जो रिच कंट्रीज़ हैं, स्पेशली फ्रॉम द ग्लोबल नॉर्थ, यूरोपियन अमेरिकन कंट्रीज़, दे कॉर्नर मोस्ट ऑफ द बेनिफिट, और रूल्स जो हैं वो उन्हीं के अकॉर्डिंग चलते हैं बिकॉज ऑफ द डीप पॉकेट्स. और फिर उसकी वजह से इंडिया हैज़ प्लेड अ विजिबल रोल फॉर द ग्लोबल साउथ, particularly its interaction with Africa and Latin America, and its leadership role in championing systemic reforms, reforms such as new international economic orders and reform of WTO, even a more equitable reform of United Nations. Now, as of the term Global South, it broadly refers to a group of developing countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, the countries that share common historical experience of colonial exploitation, underdevelopment, and marginalization in global governance. So ये जितनी भी countries हैं, Asia, Africa, and Latin America, and these are the parameters that bring them together. And then for India, the solidarity with Global South, these countries, it is not merely strategic calculation but deeply ideological, because these uh, principles and the relationship of solidarity, they are rooted in a belief that international relations must be restructured to better serve the needs and aspiration of the majority. So here it is about justice in the anarchical international sphere, that most of the parameter, most of the facets of international relations, they must keep the majority in mind. Then India's relations with Africa and Latin America. They have expanded significantly across political, economic, and cultural dimension, like initiative such as India-Africa Forum Summit, and India's building of South-South cooperation, India's engagement with Latin American economies. All these initiatives, they are based on mutual respect, non-interference, and collective empowerment. Then a central expression of India's leadership within the Global South is a role in advocating for a new international economic order. So, new international economic order is a political and economic proposal made by a developing country that seeks to restructure the global economy to correct the historical injustices of colonialism and ensure fair terms of trade, better access to technology, and greater decision making in international financial arena. So, in short, NIEO, New International Economic Order, it is about giving justice, giving due, giving their due to these countries of global south that form the majority of population. और यहाँ पे justice की बात, it means to provide fairer terms of trade deals, provide them with better access to technology, and giving them greater decision making power in international institutions. Then this leadership role, it continued from NIEO to India's advocation in the WTO negotiations. So WTO was established in 1995, It promised to create a rule-based, predictable trading system, but developing countries soon realized that the system it privileged the interest of advanced industrial nations such as those from global north. So इंडिया यहाँ पे एक और रोल प्ले कर रहा है अगेन दैट ऑफ restructuring the institution of WTO so that fair playing field can be provided. Now let's talk about India's relations with Africa. So first, the historical context, ancient and colonial roots, foundation of solidarity. India's engagement with Africa dates back over 2 millennia. So historical records show that Indian traders traveled across the Indian Ocean to eastern African coast, exchanging textiles, spices, beads for African gold, ivory, and exotic goods. Archaeological find at sites like ancient port of Sofala in present-day Mozambique and Indian artifacts in Madagascar they validate these connections. और उसके अलावा अगर evolutionary या anthropological context देखें तो Africa is considered the cradle of humankind. And उसके बाद Mesopotamia, it is considered the cradle of civilization. Both these places, Africa and the Middle East, both feature prominently in ancient trade routes, ancient Indian trade routes. Even जो हड़प्पन सिविलाइजेशन है IBC उसकी सील्स भी जो है मिडिल ईस्ट एंड अफ्रीका के अंदर मिली है. सो ऑल ऑफ दीज artifact, all of these records, they show that India and Africa के बीच में trade relations बहुत टाइम से है. Then came the colonial period when both regions faced European colonialism. India under British rule and Africa under multiple colonial ruler that endured economic extraction, racial discrimination and cultural subjugation. तो यहाँ पे जो shared experience है of humiliation, subjugation, exploitation, they sowed the seeds of solidarity. फिर इंडियन डायस्पोरा की बात करते हैं इन अफ्रीका इट नंबर्ड अराउंड 2.7 million today, that is based on MEA data, and they are living in countries like South Africa, Kenya, Uganda and Mauritius. And these diasporan community, they are acting as a living bridge. इनमें से बहुत सारे जो इंडियंस हैं they were brought to these countries as indentured laborers, क्योंकि जब colonial rulers थे उनको इन कॉलोनीज में काम करने के लिए स्लेव्स एंड वर्कर्स चाहिए थे. और ऐसे में बहुत सारे जो वर्कर्स हैं ये इंडिया से यहाँ पे माइग्रेट हुए या कॉलोनियल रूलर्स जो हैं वो इनको इंडिया से यहाँ पे लेके गए. और फिर उसकी बाद की स्टोरी आप जानते हैं, हाउ दीज इंडेंचर्ड लेबर दे बिकेम फ्रस्ट्रेटेड विद दिस रेशियल डिस्क्रिमिनेशन. फिर गांधीज एक्सपीरियंस और फिर हाउ दे कॉन्टैक्टेड Gandhi and how Gandhi evolved his ideas of satyagraha. Then Mahatma Gandhi's stay in South Africa, it was pivotal. His experience fighting racial injustice influenced his philosophy of satyagraha, which later inspired anti-colonial movement in India. So thus, ancient trade ties and colonial era solidarity, they created a historical framework and a shared identity between India and Africa. Then the next important element of India-Africa relations is India's support for African liberation movement. So first one is political and diplomatic advocacy. So India was among the four earliest supporters of Africa's decolonization. So at the United Nations, India championed African cause and condemned apartheid. And India's credential is morally reflected its support for liberation movement in Namibia, Mozambique, and Zimbabwe. So India supported all these initiatives for decolonization. Then India also imposed a voluntary trade embargo in South Africa in solidarity with the African people who were discriminated by the white minority. And India was one of the few countries to recognize the exiled government of Namibia. So through consistent diplomatic efforts, India upheld the principle of racial equality and self-determination. Then came the Bandung Conference and non-aligned movements. So at Bandung Conference 1955, India worked alongside leaders like Kwame Nkrumah and Gamal Abdel Nasser to articulate Africa, Afro-Asia solidarity against colonialism and neocolonialism. और यही कॉन्फ्रेंस जो है it later became foundation for non-aligned movement. And then this initiative, it culminated in the formation of non-aligned movement in 1961 in Belgrade, where India and Africa, they rejected Cold War bipolarity and instead maintained their strategic independence by staying away from any Cold War grouping. Then, the third aspect of India's relations with Africa, it is changed from idealism to pragmatism. These are the facets of modern development and partnership. So India's Africa policy or relations, they have evolved from early idealism of solidarity to more practical approach based on mutual development. So first such initiative is India Africa Forum Summit, which started in 2008, and this summit or this chain of summit, it institutionalized engagement with structured dialogues on political cooperation, economic partnerships and capacity building. और यहाँ पे देख सकते हैं जो फर्स्ट समिट है 2008, it focused on building political consensus among India and African nations. Then the second summit in 2011, it emphasized economic cooperation and development partnership. Then the third summit in 2015, it saw participation from all 54 African countries. And here India announced 10 billion US dollar in concessional credit and 600 million US dollar in assistance. And this summit, it has led to over 200 capacity building projects and education initiatives across Africa. Now, let's come to money matters, how India has supported Africa in terms of credit and project assistance. So India has extended over 12.26 billions in lines of credit to Africa through the EXIM, the Export Import Bank of India, which include major projects that are funded by this lines of credit. First, the water supply project in Tanzania and Mozambique, then agricultural mechanization in Senegal and Rwanda, and solar electrification under the International Solar Alliance. So it's this lines of credit or project assistance, ये एक मैकेनिज्म होता है एक कंट्री का दूसरी कंट्री को फाइनेंशियली सपोर्ट करने का. It's one of the way for infrastructure development, क्योंकि infrastructure is the basis upon which a country can stand or a country can take it through. So infrastructure development, उसके लिए जो funding या finances चाहिए, they are provided by friends, bilateral partners, multilateral institutions, and then financial institutions. So World Bank and IMF तो है ही, लेकिन उनका जो structural adjustment program है, जो पिछले वाले वीडियोस में देखा था, that the assistance provided by these institutions, these Bretton Woods institutions, they come up with conditions, और उन conditions की वजह से जो poor countries हैं, they had to face many problems. So होता क्या है, जो bilateral partners हैं, they via their goodwill gestures, they provide such finances, और इन्हीं finances से उनका जो infrastructure development होता है. So India has provided around 12.26 billion to Africa. Now the fourth important pillar of India-Africa relations is economic and trade ties. So first, bilateral trade. So India-Africa trade has grown steadily, touching 98 billion US dollar in 22-23, and India is Africa's fourth largest trading partner after China, the EU, and the USA. Now the major trade commodities, which includes imports from Africa, which are crude oil from Nigeria and Angola, gold from South Africa and Ghana, and cashew nuts from Ivory Coast. Whereas export to Africa are pharmaceuticals, automobiles, electrical machinery, and textiles. Then The creation of, or the talks of creation for India-Africa Growth Corridor, jointly initiated with Japan, it aims to boost economic connectivity between Eastern Africa and India. Now, the next element, duty-free tariff preference scheme. This scheme has been started, launched in 2008, and it allows export from 38 least developing countries of Africa to access Indian market duty free. So ये जो ड्यूटी फ्री टैरिफ प्रेफरेंस है इसमें जो ये 38 पुअर कंट्रीज हैं अफ्रीका की दे कैन export their commodities to Indian market duty free without any duty. So according to the WTO, this has contributed to a 25% rise in African exports to India. फिर investment flows की बात करते हैं. So Indian investment in Africa, particularly in telecommunication, pharmaceutical, and agriculture, they are increasing. And as per CII Exim Africa Conclave that was held in 2023, Indian companies they have invested over $75 billion in Africa cumulatively. Now, as of strategic cooperation, so first defense and peacekeeping cooperation. So Indian troops they have participated in 12 UN peacekeeping missions across Africa from Congo to South Sudan, and India has also provided training to African military personnel at institutions like the National Defense College and Indian Military Academy. And recent initiative, the India-Africa Defense Dialogue at Defense Expo 2022, and India offered defense lines of credit to African nations for procurement of Indian-made defense equipment like patrol boats and radar systems. And as of maritime cooperation, अफ्रीका अगर मैप में देखें सो अफ्रीका और इंडिया इन दोनों के बीच में देयर इज नथिंग बट अ जाइंट बॉडी ऑफ वाटर नोन इंडियन ओशियन और यहाँ पे मैरीटाइम सिक्योरिटी का इश्यू एंड मैरीटाइम सिक्योरिटी अलॉन्ग विद पायरेसी ये दोनों इश्यूज बहुत होते हैं सो India's maritime partnership with Africa, it has strengthened by Mission Sagar, where various humanitarian aids have been deployed to Mauritius, Seychelles, Madagascar, and Comoros, and bilateral agreements with Mauritius, Seychelles, and Madagascar on coast guard cooperation and surveillance. Then, next initiative is Indian Ocean Naval Symposium, where Africa it participated to enhance the collective maritime security. Then, as of cultural ties and diaspora diplomacy, so Indian diaspora acting as a living bridge, a connective bridge between India-Africa relationship. So India's diaspora in Africa, that is numbered around 2.7 million strong. It concentrated in countries like South Africa, Mauritius, Kenya, and Tanzania. And in Mauritius, people of Indian origin they constitute around 68% of population. So these are the descendants of Indian laborers, Indian indentured laborers in South Africa. They continue to influence culture, business, politics, and engage in lobbying activity in favor of Indian government. Now, as of cultural diplomacy, so Indian cultural centers they operate in countries like South Africa, Kenya, and Egypt, promoting yoga, Indian music and dance. And Bollywood movies are also highly popular in Nigeria and East Africa. And India has also provided scholarship under ICCR and training program under ITEC that contribute to cultural and educational exchanges. Now, contemporary challenges and the way forward. So, first challenge is the competition from Chinese investment. क्योंकि the China-Africa trade it has crossed 282 billion US dollar, which is dwarfing India's trade figure. So India का जो trade volume है, it is way less than the Chinese trade in Africa. Then implementation delays. So बहुत सारे Indian projects हैं like e-network initiative, they face delay due to bureaucratic bottlenecks. फिर security risks जो है such as the instability in the Sahel region, the piracy in the Gulf of Guinea, and extremist threat, Al-Sahab हो गया, ISIS हो गया, एंड रिसेंटली बोको हराम हो गया. So these revolutionary element, these uh, militant elements, they are posing threats to India's investment and infrastructure projects. और फिर उसके अलावा जो साउथ सूडान में जो इंस्टेबिलिटी चल रही, पॉलिटिकल इंस्टेबिलिटी, फिर यही जो चीज़ जो है नाइजीरिया के अंदर भी है. सो बहुत सारी जो अफ्रीकन कंट्रीज़ हैं उनके अंदर जो मिलिट्री कूज वगैरह है वो भी एक इशू है. Then diverse priorities, which is another challenge, a practical challenge that Africa's 54 nations, they have varied interests, and one size fits all priority, they prove to be ineffective. Now the solutions, India needs to enhance project delivery by ensuring timely execution of development projects and reducing the bureaucratic red tapeism. Then the second solution is to expand diplomatic presence. So India has opened 18 new embassies but need further outreach. क्योंकि जो Chinese outreach देखेंगे तो China has embassies in almost all African nations. फिर India needs to boost private sector investment by encouraging Indian companies in sector like digital economy, renewable energy, agri-tech. So इन सब में जो प्राइवेट सेक्टर इन्वेस्टमेंट हैं वो देना पड़ेगा, क्योंकि जो स्टेट इनिशिएटिव्स हैं या जो स्टेट ग्रांट्स हैं वो कॉम्पनसेट नहीं कर पाते, क्योंकि स्टेट के पास और भी प्रायोरिटीज़ हैं. स्टेट का बजट भी बहुत कम होता है, एंड स्पेशली जो इंडियन पॉपुलेशन जो शुरू में बात की थी कि वो इतनी है कि जो जीडीपी है एंड जो ओवरऑल टैक्स कलेक्शन है वो कम होता है सभी चीज़ों में डिस्ट्रीब्यूट करने के लिए. तो ऐसे में अगर प्राइवेट सेक्टर को अगर आगे लाया जाए, प्राइवेट सेक्टर इज़ एनकरेज टू इन्वेस्ट इन अफ्रीका, सो इससे तो दोनों चीज़ें ठीक हो जाए सी कि इंडिया के जो अफ्रीका के साथ जो डिप्लोमेटिक एंड स्ट्रेटजिक रिलेशंस हैं वो भी स्ट्रांग होंगे, और जो इंडियन प्राइवेट सेक्टर हैं इट विल आल्सो gain a global stature. Then India needs to advocate for Africa globally. So India must support African Union's permanent membership in the G20 and in the United Nations Security Council. Then India needs to strengthen maritime security by deepening maritime ties via joint naval exercising and capacity building. So this is it. Thank you very much.